The rough hands of Sheriff Dalton gripped Winifred Zimmerman's thin wrists so hard she thought the bones might snap, dragging her through the dusty main street of Fort Yuma, California. As townspeople stopped to stare at the spectacle unfolding before them in the scorching afternoon heat of 1878. Winifred's bare feet scraped against the parched earth, her worn calico dress torn at the hem, her dark hair falling loose from its pins as she stumbled forward, desperately trying to keep pace with the lawman's furious stride while clutching the stolen loaf of bread against her chest, like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Please, Sheriff, I can explain," Winifred gasped, her voice cracking from thirst and fear as the merciless Arizona sun beat down on them. "My little sister, she has not eaten in 3 days. I did not know what else to do." "Save it for the judge," Dalton growled, his weathered face showing no mercy as he yanked her forward. "Theft is theft, and Baker Morrison wants you locked up. Says you have been eyeing his shop for weeks now." Tears streamed down Winifred's dust-streaked cheeks as she caught glimpses of the faces around her. Some showed pity, others showed disgust, but none moved to help. She was an outsider here, had been ever since she and her younger sister Violet arrived 6 months ago after their parents died of fever on the wagon train west. They had nothing, no family, no money, no prospects. Winifred had tried finding work, but respectable positions were scarce for a 20-year-old woman with no references and a child to care for. The jailhouse loomed ahead, a squat adobe building that looked like a tomb in the harsh light. Winifred's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized what this meant. If she went to jail, what would happen to Violet? The girl was only 8 years old, too young to be left alone in the ramshackle tent they called home on the edge of town. She would starve, or worse, be taken by some stranger who might not have her best interests at heart. Wait. The single word cut through the commotion like a knife, spoken in a deep, steady voice that carried authority without shouting. Sheriff Dalton stopped so abruptly that Winifred crashed into his back. She stumbled, nearly falling, but rough hands steadied her from behind. When she looked up, she saw a man stepping down from the wooden boardwalk, his spurs jingling softly with each measured step. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty blue work shirt. A brown leather vest hung open over his chest, and worn denim pants were tucked into scuffed riding boots. A Stetson hat shadowed his face, but Winifred could make out strong features, a square jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes the color of summer grass that were fixed intently on the sheriff. "What business is this of yours, Lawson?" Dalton demanded, his grip on Winifred's wrist tightening possessively. The cowboy, Lawson, pushed his hat back slightly, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face that looked to be about 25 years old, weathered by outdoor work but undeniably handsome. "How much does she owe Morrison?" 2 loaves of bread over the past week, plus the one she got today. $3 total, but that is not the point. We cannot have people thinking they can just take what they want. Lawson reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather coin purse. "I will pay Morrison $6. 3 for what she took, and 3 more for his trouble and injured pride." He counted out the coins with steady fingers, then looked directly at Winifred for the first time. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them, a jolt of recognition that made no logical sense. He had never seen this woman before, yet looking at her tear-stained face and desperate eyes, he felt something shift in his chest, something fundamental and terrifying and utterly right. "You cannot just pay her way out of this," Dalton protested, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Why not? Morrison gets his money, even gets extra for his trouble. The woman goes free, and you do not have to waste jail space and food on someone whose only crime was trying to keep her family from starving." Lawson's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Or would you rather explain to Judge Harrison why you are locking up desperate women instead of going after the cattle rustlers that hit the McPherson Ranch last week?" The sheriff's face reddened, but he released Winifred's wrist. "Fine. But you are responsible for her now, Lawson. If she causes any more trouble, it is on your head. Understood?" Lawson turned to Winifred, his expression softening. "Come on, let us get you home." Winifred stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. This stranger had paid for her crime, had saved her from jail, and now he wanted to walk her home. Nothing in her experience had prepared her for such unexpected kindness. "Why?" she whispered. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply, offering her his arm like she was a proper lady instead of a barefoot thief in a torn dress. "And because no one should have to steal bread to feed their family." After a moment's hesitation, Winifred placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength of him through the fabric of his shirt. She was acutely aware of how she must look, dirty and disheveled, while he stood there like some hero from a dime novel. They began walking, moving away from the curious stares and whispered conversations, heading toward the poor section of town where the canvas tents and rickety shanties clustered together like wounded animals seeking shelter. "Thank you," Winifred managed, her voice barely audible. "I do not know how I will ever repay you. No need for repayment." Lawson's stride was easy, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. "My name is Lucas Xander. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles outside town. Been there 3 years now." "Winifred Zimmerman," she replied, then added, "Everyone calls me Winnie." "Pretty name." He glanced down at her, and she saw genuine warmth in those green eyes. "You said you have a sister, Violet. She is 8. We have been alone since our parents died on the trail west. I have been trying to find work, but—" She trailed off, ashamed to admit how thoroughly she had failed at taking care of her only remaining family. "These are hard times," Lucas said, and there was no judgment in his tone. "Especially for women on their own. Where are you staying?" Winifred directed him through the maze of tents and temporary structures, feeling more embarrassed with each step. What must he think of her, living in such squalor? When they finally reached the sagging canvas tent she shared with Violet, she almost wished the earth would open up and swallow her whole. The tent was barely large enough for 2 people to lie down in, with their few possessions piled in one corner and a thin blanket serving as a door. "Winnie." A small voice called from inside, weak and frightened. "Is that you?" "Yes, sweetheart, I am here." Winifred pulled back the blanket to reveal Violet, a painfully thin child with the same dark hair as her sister and large brown eyes that seemed too big for her gaunt face. She was lying on a pile of old clothes that served as a bed, her cheeks flushed with what looked like fever. Lucas took one look at the living conditions and the sick child and made a decision. "Pack whatever you need," he said firmly. "You are both coming with me." "What?" "No, I could not possibly. That child needs medicine, food, and a proper roof over her head," Lucas interrupted, his voice brooking no argument. "I have a cabin at the ranch. It is not much, but it is better than this. My boss, Mr. Richardson, he is a fair man. I am sure I can convince him to give you work in exchange for lodging." "But you do not even know us," Winifred protested, even as hope flared painfully in her chest. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Lucas crouched down so he was at eye level with her, his expression earnest. "My mother raised me to help people when I could. And right now you need help. Please let me do this." Winifred looked at Violet, at her sister's fevered face and hollow eyes, and knew she had no real choice. Pride was a luxury she could not afford, not when Violet's life hung in the balance. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you." They gathered their meager belongings quickly, everything they owned fitting into 2 cloth bundles. Lucas lifted Violet with surprising gentleness, cradling the small girl against his chest as if she weighed nothing at all. Violet's eyes widened in alarm, but Winifred stroked her hair soothingly. "It is all right, sweet girl. This man is helping us." The walk to the livery stable where Lucas kept his horse felt surreal to Winifred, like she had stepped into someone else's life. People stared as they passed, but Lucas ignored them all, focused entirely on getting them to safety. His horse, a magnificent bay gelding with intelligent eyes, stood patiently while Lucas secured their bundles to the saddle, then carefully lifted Violet onto the horse's back. "Can you ride?" he asked Winifred. "A little. It has been a while." "You will ride with Violet, make sure she does not fall. I will lead the horse." He helped Winifred mount behind her sister, his hands steady and respectful, then took the reins and began walking. The journey to the Double R Ranch took over an hour in the afternoon heat, but Lucas never complained or hurried. He kept up a gentle stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the ranch and the people who worked there, clearly trying to distract Violet from her discomfort. Winifred listened, learning that Lucas had come west from Missouri 4 years ago after his parents died, that he loved working with horses, and that he dreamed of one day having his own ranch. "What about you?" he asked, glancing back at her. "What brought you and Violet west?" "Our father believed in new beginnings," Winifred said softly. "He heard there was opportunity in California, that a man could make something of himself. He had such dreams, such plans. But then the fever came, and within a week both he and Mama were gone. We had already sold everything back home, had no money to go back even if we wanted to. So we kept going because what else could we do?" "I am sorry," Lucas said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "Losing parents is hard. I know how that feels." When the ranch finally came into view, Winifred caught her breath. It was not grand by any means, but compared to the tent she had been living in, it looked like paradise. A sprawling ranch house sat at the center, surrounded by barns, corrals, and several smaller cabins for the ranch hands. Horses grazed in fenced pastures, and the whole place had an air of prosperity and order that made Winifred's heart ache with longing. Lucas led them past the main house to a small cabin set slightly apart from the others. "This is mine," he explained, tying the horse to a post outside. "Wait here a moment." He went inside, emerging a few minutes later with the cabin tidied and a bed prepared. He lifted Violet down and carried her inside, laying her gently on the bed while Winifred hovered anxiously nearby. The cabin was simple but clean, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, a small bedroom, and a loft accessible by a ladder. "You and Violet take the bed," Lucas said. "I will sleep in the loft. First thing, though, we need to get some food and medicine into this little one." He looked at Violet, who was watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Do you like chicken soup, Miss Violet?" The girl nodded shyly. "Good, because I happen to make the best chicken soup in all of California. It is a secret recipe my mother taught me." He winked at her, and for the first time since Winifred had found him on the street, Violet smiled. Over the next few hours, Lucas proved himself to be a man of unexpected talents. He cooked a rich, nourishing soup while simultaneously sending another ranch hand to fetch medicine from town. He entertained Violet with stories while the soup simmered, and he treated both sisters with a kindness and respect that made Winifred want to weep with gratitude. When Violet finally fell into a peaceful sleep, her belly full and medicine working to bring down her fever, Winifred followed Lucas outside onto the small porch. I do not know how to thank you properly, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You saved us today, not just from jail, but from everything. Lucas leaned against the porch railing, his face thoughtful in the gathering dusk. You do not need to thank me, Winnie. I did what anyone decent would do. But not everyone is decent, she countered. Most people in town looked right through us like we were invisible. Or worse, they looked at us like we were trash, not worth their notice. But you... She stopped, struggling to find the right words. You saw us as people, as human beings who deserved help. He turned to look at her fully, and in the fading light his eyes seemed to glow. Of course you are people. You are more than that. You are a woman who loves her sister so much she was willing to risk jail to feed her. That takes courage. It takes desperation, Winifred corrected bitterly. Sometimes they are the same thing. Lucas moved closer, and Winifred became acutely aware of his height, his warmth, the way her heart was beating faster just from his proximity. Tomorrow, I will talk to Mr. Richardson about finding you work. He is always complaining about how the ranch house needs a woman's touch. His wife passed 5 years ago, and the place has been falling apart ever since. If you can cook and clean, I am sure he will hire you. I can do both, Winifred said quickly. I am a hard worker, Mr. Xander. I will earn my keep, I promise. Lucas, he corrected gently. Just Lucas. And I know you will. I can see the strength in you, even if you cannot see it yourself right now. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Somewhere a horse whinnied softly, and the wind carried the scent of hay and leather, and something indefinably masculine that Winifred was beginning to associate with Lucas himself. Why did you really help me? She asked quietly. And please do not say it is just because it was the right thing to do. There is more to it than that. I saw your face when you first looked at me. Lucas was quiet for so long that Winifred thought he would not answer. Then he said, Have you ever had a moment where you just knew something, deep in your bones, even though it made no logical sense? When I saw you being dragged through town, something inside me just woke up, like I had been sleepwalking through my life, and suddenly I was wide awake. I looked at you and I thought, this matters. She matters, and I knew I could not just walk away. Winifred's breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to her before, and the raw honesty in his voice made her chest tight. I felt it too, she admitted, when our eyes met. Like lightning, but warmer. Lucas smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. Yeah, exactly like that. The next morning, Winifred woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory flooded back, and she sat up quickly, looking over to where Violet still slept peacefully in the bed beside her. The girl's fever had broken during the night, and her breathing was steady and even. Winifred rose, smoothing down her wrinkled dress and trying to make herself presentable before venturing into the main room. Lucas was at the stove, cooking breakfast with the easy competence of someone who had been taking care of himself for a long time. He had shaved and changed into a clean shirt, and his hair was still damp from washing. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder at her. "How is Violet?" "Much better. The fever broke." Winifred felt suddenly shy, aware that she had spent the night in this man's cabin, that she was standing in his home in her stockinged feet with her hair loose around her shoulders. "You did not have to cook for us. I was making breakfast anyway. Might as well make enough for 3. He plated eggs and bacon, adding some beans from a pot at the back of the stove. "Eat up. You are going to need your strength." They ate together at the small wooden table, and Winifred could not remember the last time food had tasted so good. Lucas told her more about the ranch, about Mr. Richardson and the other hands, preparing her for what to expect. After breakfast, Winifred helped clean up, then changed Violet into the cleanest dress they had and brushed out both their hair as best she could. "You look fine," Lucas assured her when she worried about making a good impression. "Mr. Richardson cares more about character than appearance anyway." Walter Richardson turned out to be a gruff man in his 60s with shrewd blue eyes and hands gnarled from decades of ranch work. He listened without interrupting as Lucas explained the situation, then turned his assessing gaze on Winifred. "Can you cook for 20 men?" he asked bluntly. "Yes, sir. I cooked for my family and helped at church socials back home." "Can you keep house without breaking everything or stealing the silver?" Winifred flushed, but met his eyes steadily. "I am not a thief by nature, Mr. Richardson. I stole bread because my sister was starving and I had no other options. If you give me honest work and honest pay, you will have no trouble from me." Richardson's stern expression softened slightly. "Lucas here vouches for you, and he is one of the best judges of character I know. You can have the job on a trial basis. Room and board for you and the girl, plus $15 a month. You will cook 3 meals a day for the hands, keep the main house clean, do laundry and mending. It is hard work." "I am not afraid of hard work, sir, thank you. I will not let you down, see that you do not." Richardson nodded to Lucas. "Get them settled in the housekeeper's quarters. And Xander, good work." The housekeeper's quarters turned out to be a small but charming 2-room cottage attached to the main house. It had a real floor, real windows with glass, and a genuine wood-burning stove. To Winifred, it might as well have been a palace. She and Violet would have their own room, their own beds, and enough space to actually move around. "It is perfect," Winifred breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Lucas grinned. "Better than a tent. Better than anything I dared hope for." She turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You gave me my life back, Lucas. You gave us both a chance to start over. You would have found a way eventually," he said, but he looked pleased. "You are a survivor, Winnie." Over the following weeks, Winifred threw herself into her new role with fierce determination. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent her days cleaning and cooking and managing the household, and fell into bed each night exhausted but satisfied. The work was hard, as Mr. Richardson had warned, but it was honest work, and for the first time in months Winifred felt like she had purpose again. Violet flourished in the new environment. With regular meals and medicine, her health improved rapidly. She helped Winifred in small ways, setting tables and gathering eggs from the chicken coop, and the ranch hands adopted her as a sort of mascot, teaching her about horses and ropes and ranch life. She followed Lucas around whenever he was near, clearly having developed a serious case of hero worship for the man who had saved them. As for Winifred and Lucas, they fell into an easy friendship that felt as natural as breathing. Lucas made excuses to visit the main house multiple times a day, ostensibly to fetch things or deliver messages, but really just to see Winifred. They would talk while she worked, about everything and nothing, discovering shared interests and divergent opinions and all the small details that made up a human life. Lucas taught her to ride properly, taking her out on his gentle mare on Sunday afternoons, while Violet played with the other children on the ranch. Winifred mended his clothes without being asked, added extra helpings to his plate at meals, and found herself watching for his tall figure whenever she heard footsteps outside. The other ranch hands noticed, of course, and there was good-natured teasing from both sides. But there was also a kind of collective approval, as if everyone could see what Winifred and Lucas themselves were still dancing around acknowledging. "You should tell her how you feel," Tom Murphy, one of the older hands, advised Lucas one evening as they tended the horses. Woman like that will not wait forever." "I know," Lucas said, brushing down his horse with perhaps more vigor than necessary. "But what if I am wrong? What if she just sees me as a friend, someone who helped her out of a bad situation? I do not want to make things awkward or risk her losing her position here. Boy, I have been watching people court for 40 years, and I am telling you, that woman is sweet on you. The way she looks at you when you are not watching. That is not friendship. That is something deeper." Lucas wanted to believe it. God, how he wanted to believe it. Because somewhere in the past month, his protective interest in Winifred had transformed into something far more complicated. He found himself thinking about her constantly, noticing details like how she hummed while she worked, how she always made sure Violet ate before serving herself, how her rare smiles lit up her whole face. He dreamed about her at night and woke aching with wanting her. But more than physical desire, he wanted to know her thoughts, her dreams, her fears. He wanted to be the person she turned to when she was happy or sad or angry. He wanted, quite simply, everything. The catalyst came on a blazing hot afternoon in late July. Winifred was hanging laundry behind the main house when she heard shouting from the direction of the corrals. She looked up to see a horse, one of the newer, half-broken ones, rearing and bucking wildly with a rider clinging desperately to its back. Her heart stopped when she recognized Lucas. Without thinking, Winifred dropped the wet sheet she was holding and ran toward the corral, her skirts hiked up around her knees. She could hear Mr. Richardson and the other hands shouting instructions, but Lucas seemed to be in trouble. The horse was out of control, slamming itself against the fence, trying to scrape its rider off. "Lucas!" The scream tore from Winifred's throat as she watched him lose his grip and fly through the air, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. The horse, now free of its burden, continued to buck and kick, coming dangerously close to where Lucas lay unmoving. Without hesitation, Winifred climbed through the fence rails, ignoring the shouts of warning. She grabbed a bucket someone had left by the trough and banged it loudly, drawing the horse's attention away from Lucas. The animal snorted and tossed its head, but moved away, giving Winifred the space she needed to drop to her knees beside Lucas. "Lucas, can you hear me?" Her hands shook as she touched his face, feeling for breath, for a heartbeat, for any sign that he was all right. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead and his eyes were closed. Then he groaned, and Winifred nearly sobbed with relief. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found her face. "Winnie, you idiot," she choked out, tears streaming down her face now that the fear was giving way to reaction. "You absolute idiot, you could have been killed. But I was not." He tried to sit up, winced, and let her help him. "That horse has a mean streak. Obviously." She checked him over frantically, noting what looked like a badly sprained wrist and various bruises already forming, but nothing broken, nothing life-threatening. "Can you stand?" With help from both Winifred and the other hands who had finally made it into the corral, Lucas got to his feet. He swayed slightly, leaning heavily on Winifred, who wrapped her arm around his waist to steady him. They made their slow way back to his cabin, Winifred refusing to leave his side despite Mr. Richardson's assurances that the men could handle it. Once inside, she made Lucas sit in the chair by the fireplace while she fetched water and clean cloths. Her hands were still shaking as she cleaned the cut on his forehead, but she forced herself to be gentle, thorough. Lucas sat still under her ministrations, his eyes never leaving her face. "You came into the corral," he said quietly. "That was dangerous. So was staying on that devil horse, but you did it anyway." She dabbed at the wound, perhaps harder than necessary. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that someone needed to break him, and I am one of the best riders here." "Well, you are also one of the best at getting yourself hurt, apparently." She set down the cloth and looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "You scared me. I am sorry." He caught her hand, holding it gently despite his injured wrist. "I did not mean to frighten you." "I thought you were dead," Winifred whispered. "For a moment when you hit the ground and did not move, I thought you were dead, and I could not breathe. I could not think. All I knew was that I had to get to you." Lucas stood slowly, still holding her hand, and used it to pull her closer. They were inches apart now, close enough that Winifred could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Winnie, I need to tell you something." "What?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I am in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. "I have been falling for you since the moment I first saw you, and every day since has just made it worse, or better. I am not even sure anymore. All I know is that when I am with you, the world makes sense in a way it never has before. And I know I have no right to feel this way. No, I am probably just making things complicated, but I could not keep it inside anymore. I love you, Winifred Zimmerman." For a moment, Winifred could not speak, could barely breathe. Then she was kissing him, rising up on her toes to press her lips to his in a kiss that was equal parts desperation and joy. Lucas made a surprised sound, then his good arm came around her waist, pulling her flush against him as he kissed her back with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Winifred rested her forehead against his chest. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have since that first day when you stepped in and saved me. You are the best man I have ever known, Lucas Xander, and I love you with everything I am." Lucas tilted her face up to his thumb stroking her cheek with infinite tenderness. "Marry me." "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, his voice steady and sure. "I know it is fast. No, we have only known each other a month, but I also know I will never feel this way about anyone else. You and Violet, you are my family now, the family I choose. Say yes, Winnie. Please say yes." Winifred thought about all the rules she had been taught about proper courtship, about taking things slow, about being cautious. Then she thought about how Lucas had appeared in her life like a miracle when she needed one most, how he had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, how he made her feel safe and cherished and seen. She thought about Violet's obvious adoration for him, about how he would make a wonderful father someday. Most of all, she thought about how much she loved him with an intensity that both terrified and exhilarated her. "Yes," she said, her face breaking into a smile that felt like sunshine. "Yes, I will marry you." Lucas let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, forgetting about his injuries until his wrist protested and he had to set her down with a laugh. "Sorry, got carried away." "I do not care," Winifred said, kissing him again because she could, because he was hers now, because her life had somehow transformed from hopeless to hopeful in the span of a single month. "Kiss me again." He obliged happily, and they stayed like that for a long time, trading kisses and whispered promises, planning a future that had seemed impossible just weeks before. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Yuma. Violet served as Winifred's only attendant, wearing a new dress that Lucas had bought for the occasion, her face glowing with happiness. Mr. Richardson gave Winifred away, gruffly telling Lucas that he was getting a good woman and had better treat her right. The ranch hands all attended, along with half the town, curious to see the thief who had caught the heart of one of the most eligible bachelors in the area. Winifred wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair that Violet had gathered that morning. As she walked down the aisle toward where Lucas waited at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in his Sunday best, she felt like she was floating. This was real. This was happening. She was marrying the man she loved, the man who had saved her and believed in her and chosen her above all others. The vows were traditional, but when Lucas said, "I do," his voice rang out strong and clear, leaving no doubt about his commitment. And when Winifred pledged herself to him in return, she meant every word with her whole heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister intoned. "You may kiss your bride." Lucas did, thoroughly and enthusiastically, to the cheers and applause of everyone assembled. When they finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, Winifred thought she might burst from sheer happiness. The celebration afterward was lively, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Winifred danced with her new husband, with Mr. Richardson, with various ranch hands, and even managed a few turns around the floor with an ecstatic Violet. But her eyes kept returning to Lucas, drawn to him like a moth to flame, still hardly believing he was really hers. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lucas pulled Winifred aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Xander, Mrs. Xander." The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, but what about Violet?" "Already arranged. She is staying with the Richardsons' housekeeper tonight. Tomorrow we will bring her to the new house." "New house?" Winifred looked at him in confusion. Lucas grinned, looking boyish and proud. "I have been saving money for years, planning to build my own place someday. I talked to Mr. Richardson, and he is giving me a parcel of land on the eastern edge of the ranch as a wedding present. The hands helped me build a small house there over the past 2 weeks. It is not much yet, just 2 rooms, but it is ours, and we can add on as our family grows." Winifred felt tears prick her eyes again. This man, this wonderful man, had been building them a home while she had been preparing for the wedding. "Can we see it now?" That was the plan. He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her waist to take the reins. They rode through the gathering dusk, past the main ranch buildings and out across the grassland, until a small structure came into view. It was simple but sturdy, built of wood and whitewashed, with a porch across the front and windows that glowed warmly in the fading light. "Someone lit the lamps," Winifred said. "Tom did, as a favor. Wanted to make sure everything was welcoming for you." Lucas dismounted and helped her down, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition says I am supposed to carry you over the threshold. Then, by all means, do not break tradition." She wrapped her arms around his neck, her heart racing as he carried her up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior was cozy and clean, with a main room that held a table, chairs, and a small kitchen area, and a separate bedroom visible through an open doorway. Someone, probably several someones, had decorated with wildflowers in jars and laid out food for a simple supper. But Winifred barely noticed any of it, her attention entirely focused on her husband as he set her gently on her feet. "Welcome home, Winnie," Lucas said softly. "Home," she repeated, tasting the word, savoring it. "I like the sound of that." They came together in a kiss that was deeper, more urgent than any they had shared before, fueled by love and desire and the knowledge that they finally had the privacy to explore these new feelings. Lucas's hands trembled slightly as he began working at the buttons on the back of her dress, and Winifred helped him, suddenly impatient to feel his skin against hers. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, awkward in some moments as they learned each other's bodies, perfect in others when everything aligned, and they moved together like they had been made for this, made for each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Winifred's head pillowed on Lucas's chest, his fingers trailing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," Winifred murmured. "A month ago I was living in a tent, starving, watching my sister waste away with no hope for the future. And now I am here in my own home, married to the man I love. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, then we are both having it," Lucas said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "And I never want to wake up." They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams. Lucas wanted to expand their house, eventually build a barn and start raising horses of his own. Winifred wanted to make their home beautiful, wanted to give Violet the stable, loving childhood she deserved, wanted to maybe, someday, have children of their own. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, content and complete. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Winifred's life. She threw herself into making their little house a home, sewing curtains, planting a garden, learning to cook the dishes Lucas particularly loved. Violet thrived, growing stronger and healthier, attending the small school in town and making friends among the other ranch children. And Winifred's relationship with Lucas deepened with each passing day, their love maturing from the initial passionate rush into something steadier, more enduring. They had their challenges, of course. Money was sometimes tight, and there were disagreements about how to spend what they had. Lucas worked long hours, especially during busy seasons, and sometimes came home so exhausted he could barely speak. Winifred missed having female companionship, having grown up in a large social family back east. But they weathered each difficulty together, learning to communicate, to compromise, to support each other through hard times. One evening in late October, about 4 months after their wedding, Winifred stood at the stove preparing supper when a wave of nausea hit her so suddenly she had to grip the counter to stay upright. She stood very still, breathing carefully through her nose until the sensation passed. It was not the first time this had happened over the past few weeks, and combined with the other signs her body had been giving her, she was fairly certain she knew what it meant. When Lucas came home that evening, tired and dusty from a day of mending fences, he found Winifred waiting on the porch, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. "Is everything all right?" he asked immediately, concern flooding his features. "Everything is perfect," Winifred said, standing and taking his hands in hers. "Lucas, I am fairly sure. I believe I am going to have a baby." For a moment Lucas just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face split into the widest grin she had ever seen, and he let out a shout of pure joy, picking her up and spinning her around. "A baby! We are going to have a baby!" "Careful," Winifred laughed, clinging to him. "You will make me dizzy." He set her down immediately, then dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Winifred ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love you so much." "I love you too, both of you now." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for this gift, Winnie. Thank you for everything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Winifred found the morning sickness exhausting and the gradual swelling of her body both fascinating and uncomfortable. Lucas treated her like precious glass, constantly hovering and worrying, until she had to firmly tell him that she was pregnant, not dying, and could still do most of her normal activities. Violet was thrilled about becoming an older sister, and helped prepare the small nursery they created in one corner of the bedroom, sewing baby clothes and knitting tiny blankets with the determination of a child on a mission. In March of 1879, on a mild spring evening when the desert wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, Winifred went into labor. The local midwife, Mrs. Chen, was summoned, and Lucas was banished to wait outside with the other men, where he paced frantically for hours. Violet stayed with the Richardsons, spared from the intensity of the birthing room. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Winifred thought she might not survive it. But Mrs. Chen was experienced and capable, and just before dawn, a baby's cry pierced the air. "You have a son," the midwife announced, placing the squalling, red-faced infant on Winifred's chest. "A son." Winifred stared down at the tiny, perfect creature in her arms, overwhelmed by a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. He had a shock of dark hair like hers and what looked like his father's nose, and when he finally stopped crying and opened his eyes, she could have sworn they were green. "Can I come in now?" Lucas's voice called anxiously from outside the door. "Yes, come meet your son, Mrs. Chen said, and then Lucas was there, falling to his knees beside the bed, his face wet with tears as he looked at his child for the first time. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered, reaching out with one trembling finger to stroke the baby's soft cheek. "Winnie, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Winifred asked. They had discussed names endlessly over the past months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her husband's awestruck face as he gazed at his son, Winifred knew exactly what felt right. "What was your father's name, James?" Lucas said. "James Edward." "Then James Edward Xander he is. Welcome to the world, little Jamie." The baby made a small, snuffling sound, and both parents laughed, giddy with exhaustion and joy. They were a family now, truly and completely, and nothing had ever felt so right. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by both challenges and triumphs. Jamie grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere and wrapped both his mother and Aunt Violet around his tiny fingers. When he was 2, Winifred gave birth again, this time to twin girls they named Sarah and Emma. The house that had once seemed spacious now felt cramped, so Lucas and the other ranch hands spent a summer building an addition, creating more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Lucas's horse breeding business grew slowly but steadily, earning a reputation for quality animals. Winifred took on occasional dressmaking work from town, using her skill with a needle to supplement their income. Violet grew into a lovely young woman who eventually married one of the newer ranch hands, a good man named Peter, who treated her with the kindness and respect she deserved. The wedding was a joyous occasion, and Winifred cried tears of happiness watching her sister pledge her life to someone who clearly adored her. As Winifred and Lucas approached their 10th anniversary, they had 5 children, a thriving business, and a love that had only grown stronger through the years. They had weathered droughts and financial setbacks, childhood illnesses and sleepless nights, disagreements and reconciliations. Through it all, they had held fast to each other, remembering that day in Fort Yuma when their paths had crossed and changed both their lives forever. One evening, after the children were all asleep and the house was finally quiet, Lucas and Winifred sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over the desert landscape. Winifred leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth of his arm around her waist. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked quietly. "The day you paid the baker all the time," Lucas admitted. "Best decision I ever made, stepping in to help you, changed my entire life. Changed mine too, saved it really." She turned to look up at him, studying the face she knew as well as her own now, noting the lines that time and laughter had carved around his eyes, the silver starting to thread through his dark hair. "I was so lost back then, so hopeless. And you appeared like some kind of guardian angel and gave me everything I had thought I lost forever." "We gave each other everything," Lucas corrected gently. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, Winnie. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working hard but never really living. You and the children, you are what makes it all worthwhile. You are what makes me whole." "I love you," Winifred said simply. "More now than even on our wedding day, which I would not have thought possible. I love you too." Lucas kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then finally her lips, a soft, lingering kiss that held years of devotion and partnership. Forever and always. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life together that exceeded anything they had dared to dream. The little girl who had been dragged through the streets for stealing bread had become a respected member of the community, a successful businesswoman, a devoted mother. The cowboy who had stepped in to help a stranger had found his soulmate, his partner, his home. Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, told and retold with varying degrees of drama, depending on who was doing the telling and how old the audience was. It became family legend, the tale of how Mama had been saved by Papa's kindness, how true love could bloom even in the most desperate circumstances, how one person's compassion could change everything. As the years rolled on, Lucas and Winifred grew old together, their love a constant through all the changes that time brought. They celebrated their children's weddings and welcomed grandchildren with the same joy they had experienced with their own babies. They weathered the inevitable losses, holding each other through grief, knowing that whatever came, they would face it together. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by 3 generations of family in the large ranch house they had built together over the decades, Winifred stood and raised her glass. "I want to make a toast," she said, her voice still strong despite her 70 years. "To my husband, the man who saw me at my absolute lowest and decided I was worth saving. You gave me everything, Lucas. A home, a family, a life worth living. But most importantly, you gave me your heart, and I have treasured it every single day since. Here is to 50 more years." "I will drink to that," Lucas said, standing beside her and taking her hand, the same way he had 50 years ago in a dusty California town. His hair was white now, his body bent with age, but his eyes still held that same warmth, that same love that had made her heart skip when she was 20. They kissed to the cheers of their assembled family. And in that moment, Winifred was transported back to that first kiss in Lucas's cabin, when everything had been new and uncertain and terrifying and wonderful. They had built such a beautiful life together, she and this man who had rescued her from jail and walked her home. Every moment had been worth it, every challenge overcome, every joy celebrated. This was what love looked like, not in the passionate first days, but in the steady, enduring commitment that lasted through decades, through hardships and triumphs, through everything life could throw at them. As the party continued around them, Lucas leaned down to whisper in Winifred's ear. "Thank you for saying yes that day when I asked you to marry me." "Thank you for asking," Winifred whispered back. "Thank you for everything, my love." They stood together surrounded by the family they had created, the legacy of that single act of kindness so many years ago, proof that love could indeed conquer all, that hope could be found even in the darkest moments, and that sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales did come true, even in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Old West. When Lucas and Winifred eventually passed, many years later, they went within months of each other, as if neither could bear to be parted from the other for long. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery overlooking the ranch they had built together, their matching headstones bearing simple inscriptions: beloved husband, father, grandfather; beloved wife, mother, grandmother. But to those who had known them, those simple words could never capture the depth of what they had meant to each other. The profound connection that had begun with a cowboy paying a baker for stolen bread and ended only when death finally parted them. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued to tell their story, passing it down through generations as a reminder that kindness matters, that love is worth fighting for, and that the smallest actions can have the most profound consequences. The little house that Lucas had built for his bride still stood on the ranch, preserved and cherished, a monument to a love that had transcended circumstance and endured through time. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the desert wind blew soft across the land, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand across the property, a tall cowboy and a slender woman, still together even in death, still in love after all these years, their story a testament to the transformative power of compassion, courage, and an open heart.